There have been 7 successful coup attempts in Africa in the last 3 years, raising concerns about the decline of democracy on the continent. Coups are not new to Africa, which is, of course, home to about 1.4 billion people, about, of course, 1/5 of the global population. After most African countries gained independence in the mid to late 20th century, many of them witnessed takeovers of government by the military.
However, as the country stabilized, democracy disappeared to be gaining foot across, or rather, democracy appeared, I beg your pardon, to be gaining foot across the continent. Now, we know that the world is increasingly moving from democracy to liberalism, and in the West, and in West Africa's case, the pace of the slide towards liberal democracy and now full-blown military dictatorship is alarming and shows that democracy on the continent is not in a good place at the moment. Last week's coup in Burkina Faso is the most recent. It was also the second coup witnessed in the West African country this year. Our guest this morning is Cyril Abaku. He's an African affairs researcher, and he'll be joining us to talk about the coups in Africa. Thank you so much for coming this morning.
My pleasure, Olive.
Now, Cyril, coups have become some sort of a norm, if you put it that way, in Africa, and we're starting to see that it's happening more and more regularly. Why would you say this is prevalent in this part of the world?
For a variety of factors, and from many perspectives. Let's even begin from Africa's major disadvantage in terms of slave trade and in terms of the fact that we were the worst colonized in the world. Worst colonized, but most resourceful in terms of natural resources. So when you have a weak people, weak institutions, weak leadership, and a willingness to place little or no value on vast amounts of natural resources, it is only normal that your neighbors who are richer, your neighbors who are more powerful, will tend to look at you as a place to loot and to dig up resources. In the end, most of these schools are just to find puppets into power so that economic colonialism will continue. I don't find it particularly strange. If you even look at the case of West Africa, for example, more specifically French West Africa, right from independence, it has always been a case of a people and the dominance or the predominance of their colonizers, even after independence. Look at all of them, from Cote d'Ivoire to Cameroon to Mali, Togo, and so on and so forth. It's the same story. Right now, what we even have is a relapse, actually. Because at a time, from the time Nigeria gained return to democracy, 15, 20 years ago, we began to see that we gained a bit of stability, but it has not lasted. And look at Burkina Faso. This is clearly a case of two major world powers struggling for space and for show of strength. In the end, it is the Burkinabe that suffer. In the end, there is instability. In the end, it is democracy that is also taking the back seat. So these are some of the issues that are really at play. It's not about coups. It's about the voice of Jacob and the hand of Esau.
Well, so what you're saying is that these developments that we're seeing both in Francophone Africa and in other parts of the continent aren't necessarily about the people fighting to get to take control of their government or about disgruntled military officers. It is the colonial masters that are still playing their roles in putting their, of course, puppet governments in power.
Osage, let me give you a little bit of background. In January this year, there was the first coup that brought Damiba in Burkina Faso. At the UN Security Council, there was a debate. The council had condemned the coup, which was normal, had said that there was need for stability and so on. But when it came to the particular article where they wanted to call for a speedy return to civilian government or to democracy, the information we have has it that Russia said that particular item, that particular part of the draft be taken away. It was hotly debated, it was contested. In the end, Russia prevailed. Okay, Russia won, and that item had to be taken off. So if you check the statement carefully, what the UN Secretary General said was not the same thing as what the Security Council said. So you have these disparities. The idea, the whole idea was that with the member in power, he would be able to strengthen the military, carry out reforms, overcome the rebels in the Sahel and so on, because about 40% of Burkinabe land is not under government control, which is quite alarming if you ask me. But it's easy to say, but then it's difficult to execute. As I speak to you, you know, if you look at the tone of the reportage, it appears that Russia has welcomed the coup and is asking for stability, is saying that, okay, But is that what France is saying? Protesters in Ouagadougou, we are waving Russian flags and Burkina Faso flags, and even went as far as attacking the French embassy. So it just tells, I mean, this is, so am I blaming Russia and France? Maybe yes, maybe no. But the fact is, there is a pattern. There is a pattern.
All right.
If
you've talked about, you know, there being a pattern, and we're seeing now that what is happening is that democracy is moving more towards a liberal democracy. Now, Burkina Faso has experienced their second coup this year, but they're not the only one. We have a map that's showing, you know, the countries that have experienced coup in Africa in 2019 and 2021. Sudan witnessed 2 successful coups. In Chad, 2021, Chad recorded a coup following the death of President Idriss Deby. Mali in 2021, a coup was led by the then Vice President Assimi Goïta. Burkina Faso, of course, we've talked about Burkina Faso. And then in Guinea, 2021, President Alpha Condé, after hours of heavy gunfire, was ousted by military because of corruption, economic mismanagement, and abuse of human rights. So what we're seeing is different coups happening in different parts of the continent. Cyril, would you say that in some way this is some form of copycat coup that's happening, and are we expected to see more coming?
Well, Olive, let me draw your mind to something. If you can if you can put up that the map again, you have Guinea, you have Burkina Faso, Mali, Chad. Predominantly, this is French West Africa. It may be argued that Sudan is East or Central Africa is fine because it's more part of IGAD than of the West. But you cannot take away the factor of geographical contiguity, which brings to mind a very fundamental question. How can ECOWAS and even IGAD or the other Central African body, you know, come together and work out a lasting solution in partnership with the big powers to say, look, we want stability, we want an African solution to African problems. This may be high sounding or even highfalutin, but can we even take the first step? You have to understand that when Ibrahim Traore was given, you know, when that speech was being delivered, they were accusing Damiba of being too Francophile. I mean, these are facts. They are there. This coup was clearly, apart from the domestic issues, was also a problem. They were angry with Damiba's foreign policy. Let me just put it that way. They were saying that he was aligning with France when he should have been aligning with Russia. So this is I remember that even in January, the question was that you know, let's look for a different foreign partner to deal with. But Damiba came in and he was not playing through to type. So they said, okay, it's fine. Let's do everything. Believe me. I think Traore should have learned his lessons, and you will see from his own personal foreign policy where everything is going to go. Africa, for what it is worth, in much of the 20th century, more than 50% of the coups that took place in the world were in Africa, and these coups were happening in the second to third world. Look at Latin America and Africa. Africa had the lion's share. Why? Because internally we cooperate with our predators, because we don't have the systems and structures that can strengthen internal governance, and because the frank truth is that in spite of independence that we attained in the middle to late 20th century, we did not have the kind of ideological systems of government that were the foundations of Europe. If you look at Norway, look at Denmark, look at even England, look at all European countries, their political parties are mostly left of center, right, and so on. In Africa, it is always ruling party versus opposition. So it's just, this sort of tribal opposition. We are not people who are looking at ideas and driven by philosophies. Okay. When that is your foundation, you can expect that anything can crash on it. And so we've built governments, we've talked of democracy, but even in democracies, people don't have freedom.
No, the moral, of the story from what you've painted now is that none of these coups are, for an improvement in the welfare
Not at
or
all.
living standards of the African people or the people in that country. Every time, if you remember, it's like clockwork. Every time that there's a coup, it blames the previous government of corruption and mismanagement and abuse of human rights and some of all of that. And then it comes into power and does maybe worse or pretty much the same thing. It's never really about the improvement of the lives of the people, but instead world powers placing their grip in different parts of the world, and fighting, politically and maybe also with military to place their, have a stronger grip in different parts of the world. So either it's France against Russia, or it is China against the United States, or it is United States against Russia. But those are some of the things that we're seeing play out, and it's affecting the African continent, sadly.
Right. Before we wrap this up, I wanted to ask you the role of the regional blocs. What's ECOWAS and the African Union in this? I know you did mention that we should look inward and look for African solutions. Let's x-ray the performance so far. We know that typically when when there's a coup, they would come out to condemn the coup. The leaders of the coup, they'll place travel bans on them and their family members. So far, how have they fared in ensuring that they put measures to contain the behaviors of the people who are in fact leading the coup and to prevent future coup?
Well, Olive, let me be very frank with you. You know that whatever ECOWAS is going to do is already predictable. The coup plotters have, they have all these things planned out. So here are a few spoilers here. Number one is the fact that Burkina Faso is one of the they are poor. They are one of the poorest countries. So there is only a limit to what you can do in terms of imposing economic sanctions. Otherwise, you end up even putting out the little flame, the little flicker that they have economically. That's one. Number two, the promises that Captain Traore, if I'm not mistaken, has made about the fact that he does not even want to lead the new government. He is saying that they are going to wait until December to look at whether they should lead or a civilian should lead, but I think that is even a fait accompli. He has also said that they are going to stick by and which is what ECOWAS also wanted, which is to say that Burkina Faso has to stick with the transition plan that was in place since January, which means that elections will take place and there will be a new democratic government in 2024. Because Traore has already pledged to stick by that, I think he will have little or less to contend with that, and that much ECOWAS has also agreed with him. That's one. Number two, let's not it shouldn't be lost on us that ECOWAS is populated by French West Africa. Please don't forget this. And so a lot of times, even in ECOWAS, you find that sometimes what they say only echoes what suits certain people outside of Africa. I think I'll just hold you there. So in the end, Mr. Traore having pledged to abide by the transition program that's already in place, I mean, it's in 2024. Let's hope that they'll just let him, give him the benefit of the doubt, and have him, see it through to a logical conclusion.
We'll definitely get to see how it plays out over time. Thank you very much, Cyril, for your time this morning and for a totally different perspective from these.
My pleasure.